Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Raleigh City Council meeting. Our first item on the agenda is a joint hearing with the Raleigh Historic Development Commission. We do not have a quorum, so we cannot proceed with the hearing. So what we're going to do is reschedule this for February 15th. And if everybody could mark their calendars and also alert the members of the Historic Development Commission, we can gather again the next time. So I want to thank everybody who did make it tonight, and we will reconvene on the 15th. Thank you.
Apologies all around.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Next item on the agenda is public comment. I would like to remind everybody of the rules of decorum. Please show grace and kindness. We'll start with Michael Lindsay. And everybody has 2 minutes.
Michael Lindsay, I live at 1406 Park Drive. Mayor Baldwin and City Council members, thank you for your public service and this opportunity to speak with you. However, you talk about things happening. I sent in a presentation Friday by 4:30 that I was just told was not given or sent in time, which is not correct. So my comments to you tonight were very critical to have the visuals associated with it, and unfortunately that's not going to happen. So I'm going to have to check in with you guys at the next open comments period, and I look forward to talking with you then about community engagement and the progress that we've been making as a city. And that's my time, and I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Next, we have Danielle Menkesi.
Mayor, Danielle is not on the call.
Okay, Mariah Kern.
Mariah is also not on the call.
Christina Jones.
Finland, 8005 Finland Drive. Today marks 2 years since this council decided to disband the CAC structure that had been established 4 decades earlier, all with a simple motion that had not been included in the agenda. There's been a lot of anger since then regarding that decision, and absolutely no clarification. As frustrated residents continue to stand before you to ask questions, the response from the majority of you has been to tell us to move on. When we ask, what are we moving on to? You keep changing the scapegoat. First, it was the consultant, Mickey Fern, who was paid over $70,000 to write a report. Then it was the task force that he created, which fizzled out after Mickey Fern quit over the summer. And now we're waiting on the Office of Community Engagement to get up and running. There's still no plan, 2 years in, to ensure that residents have a voice in the city as CAC's provided. With all of that, while all of that is an entire conversation on its own, I don't want anyone to get distracted enough to forget and look at what the city is doing while residents are not being engaged. The amount of rezonings has skyrocketed under this council. Planning commission members have spoken out about the increased workload they have had to take on because resident voices are not being brought before them as they were with CACs. I have brought up in the last 2 meetings questions regarding the $12 million allocated to Dick's Plaza in Play. And instead of having a conversation, I was sent to 2 different city staff members who both echoed the point that they could not speak on council's decision-making process. We all have to remember to ask why in every situation that community engagement is cut off. Why eliminate resident feedback? Why are we pushing through rezonings? Why does council ignore emails from concerned residents? Even those of us who follow your rules cannot get you to respond in a timely fashion. And how is this leadership? Raleigh Citizens Advisory Council will be meeting on Zoom on February 16th at 7 p.m. Find us on Facebook to join our conversation with Police Chief Estella Patterson and Community Engagement Manager Taisha Hinton. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina, there was a presentation today from our new Community Engagement Director that you might want to check out. She outlines a path forward with step 1, which is Community Engagement Board. So thank you. Next, we have Tim Niles.
I've submitted a video, a 2-minute video for my public comment when the technician has time to start it. It's 2 minutes in length. This is Tim Niles, 11509 Midlothian Drive.
Is there a reason why there's no sound?
Where you reside. CACs are nonpartisan. They're the only advisory boards to the City Council not appointed by the Council. Raleigh's CACs are a connecting point between municipal government and residents. And to receive feedback from the community. Through CACs, residents and neighborhood groups participate in decisions directly affecting them. For instance, CACs have a voice in planning and development issues. Most proposals for rezoning property go before a local CAC for review. Often a person seeking rezoning will appear before the CAC to discuss the proposal. Each CAC holds regular meetings and everyone is welcome to attend. The meetings provide a forum to share information about neighborhood improvement plans and other neighborhood issues. City Council members sometimes attend CAC meetings to talk about items before the Council. City staffers often appear at CAC meetings to give updates on projects or discuss how the city can assist with different services each department offers. Police representatives usually attend to discuss crime trends and offer crime prevention tips. All neighborhood-based organizations, such as neighborhood and homeowner associations, are encouraged to send representatives to CAC meetings and share information about the CAC proceedings with their members. It's important that every neighborhood have representation at CAC meetings because broader input leads to better decision-making.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Lisa Huguet.
Yes, good evening. My name is Lisa Hewitt, and I live at 712 Hinsdale Street. I would like to reject further consideration of TC 1221, accessory commercial units. By allowing commercial businesses to operate in residential neighborhoods without the special permit process that currently exists, you are effectively eliminating residential zoning. The main objective presented for ACUs was to increase access to fresh and healthy foods. This is already allowed by the farm stand and neighborhood gardens text change. In addition, if you were to look at the SNAP map identifying food deserts in Raleigh, those areas already line up with mixed-use zoning. So if the existing zoning hasn't addressed food access, this text change won't. Beyond the realities of the substantial cost barriers and thin profit margins for restaurants, the USDA has found that restaurants do not eliminate or ease food deserts, nor does expanding commercial zoning in residential areas. But the most alarming part of this text change is the complete lack of enforcement or regulation. The city can't regulate what's sold in someone's home. Alcohol, tobacco, firearms would be allowed. The only recourse a neighbor has is to report their neighbor or confront them. This does not really contribute to a safe and vibrant community. Also keep in mind, this city-wide text change would only affect neighborhoods that aren't protected by HOAs. I'm curious about what's wrong with the existing special permitting process. Is it too expensive? Does it take too long? With a special permit application, at least neighbors would be notified and can have a voice. If this process is too cumbersome, perhaps ACUs become a modified live-work ordinance, retaining neighborhood notifications, but with lower evidentiary thresholds. As it stands, this text change is reckless and unnecessary. It is a solution in search of a problem. But I would like to end by recognizing the hard work the Planning Commission has done to understand your request and has been very responsive in addressing our concerns. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Lisa. And just so you know, we gave Planning Commission another 45 days extension to continue working on this. So thank you. Next, we have Edgar Vergara.
Yes, hello. My name is Javier Vergara, 405 Advancement Avenue. I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you for kindly approving our request for funding to continue COVID-19 response efforts in Raleigh. Thank you, first of all, for allowing us a small amount to continue work while you requested documents and then discussed and voted. I really appreciate it. That allowed us to continue testing, COVID-19 testing. And we had to cancel one vaccination event because of the inclement weather. But I'm happy to report, and with words of gratitude, that we were able to do our first vaccination clinic and they were apartments, and we had 129 vaccines that day, out of which 49 were first doses. It is quite uncommon in these types of events to have such a number of first doses, and that just tells us of the relevance of this work of taking vaccines to where people live. It really makes a difference when you get back from work 6 p.m., 7 p.m. On a Friday evening, if a vaccine is waiting for you in your front door, it definitely makes a difference. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I look forward to sending you updates and pictures of the work we'll be able to continue because of your kind approval of our request. You have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Edgar. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Next, we have Haley Kinsler.
Haley Kinsler, 804 Gorman Street, Apartment C. In the past several weeks, we have seen multiple instances of police brutality in North Carolina, and our community members have marched to call upon their local government officials to address this violence. As recently as MLK Day, a group of young activists came together to protest the murder of Jason Walker in Fayetteville. The group that marched included several young members of our community. 30 or less people marched, and despite that, as soon as the group took to the street, RPD made use of a long-range acoustic device against them. For those unfamiliar with LRAD, it is essentially a loudspeaker that has a decibel capacity between 130 and 160 decibels. Mind you, that is more than enough to cause permanent hearing loss. While on this most recent occasion the LRAD was not at its highest setting, it should be noted that the very presence of such a device itself constitutes a threat to people in Raleigh who are engaging in their civil right to march. The use of an LRAD in any capacity against a group of students and young people marching is wrong. How can the City Council demand kindness from the people of Raleigh during public comment while permitting the RPD to threaten protesters for simply exercising their right to march? How can they claim to care about communities of color while failing to address the recent murder of community member Danielle Turcios on Highway 440? It should be noted that W.B. Tapscott, who shot Keith Collins resulting in his death, faced no repercussions despite community concerns. Tapscott was also present for the murder of Danielle Turcios, tasing him before he was fatally shot by another officer. How many times does an officer in Raleigh have to be involved in the death of a community member before it is taken seriously? For this reason, I call on the City Council to stand by the people of Raleigh and help us in holding these officers accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Hua Huang.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hua Huang, 7401 Ebenezer Church Road, 27612. On January 17, 2022, Martin Luther King Day, people were marching, calling for justice for Jason Walker. That day, the city of Raleigh disrespected MLK by allowing the police to follow the rally and use a long-range acoustic device against the participants. Councilmember Melton tweeted on May 30, 2020 that he will work to fight systemic racism within our city and work on changes to police policy. Let's review the 5 demands from Raleigh Demands Justice from 2020. 1. The removal of Chief Dak Brown. Her resignation is no more than a political move because the equally harmful behaviors from RPD continue under the new chief. 2. The establishment of Police Advisory Board. This board has no real subpoena power, and 2 of its members have resigned since. 3. No new police stations to be built, yet this city added $5 million budget to the police last summer. 4. Intervention of police by fellow colleagues when being abusive to detainees. The only thing we've been told by the council is that what happened in Minneapolis will not happen in Raleigh, but there's no metrics to whether this policy is being enforced. 5. Investment of community-led health and safety strategies. The city created Acorns, a unit with social workers still not independent from RDP. We can see that these demands are not enough for today. It's been 2 years, and you have police killing Black rights protesters on MLK Day in 2022. Black rights is just words to you, and it shows. Because your solution to your anti-Black practices is to have media help spin your narrative. You go on camera using words like equity, sustainability, and holistic to placate the masses. You think you can get away with it by waiting long enough for the people to disappear as a result of police violence, or by landlords pricing them out, or by not seeking re-election when going gets tough and you catch too much heat. Pay attention to and address the needs of those impacted by your anti-Black practices. Equity and justice is also about accountability, and for this reason, the people will hold the city accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Josh Bradley.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Josh Bradley, 1324 Spring Lawn Court. In recent times, this council has gone out of its way to approve dense luxury housing, often at the expense of low-cost housing and the environment. The prevailing wisdom on this council seems to be that an increase in housing will have a positive, of luxury, of any housing will have a positive effect on the availability of low-cost housing. This would only occur if there were an excess housing stock. This doesn't make any sense, as we are one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country. There is no way that we can build ourselves out of this crisis of affordability with luxury and market rate housing. This council has time and again said that it is not legal for them to consider affordable housing as a part of the zoning process. Surely, as they were able to talk the General Assembly to giving them an extra unelected year in their terms, they can get their friends there to change the law to allow low-cost housing to be considered in zoning approvals. If this doesn't work, it is worth not approving any rezoning until the General Assembly changes the law allowing housing affordability to be considered in zoning cases. This would put pressure on your developer friends to get the state representatives and senators that they bought to change the law. The lack of low-cost housing in the city already has some significant impacts. The unhoused population has grown dramatically over the past several years, and it has become almost impossible to find an apartment in the city for under $1,000 a month. With housing costs as they are, how are working people afford to live in the city? Don't you think the cost of housing combined with low wages are at least in part responsible for the trouble the service industry has filling its vacancies? This city could not function without folks to collect the garbage and recycling, maintain the water system, teach and otherwise support our schools, work at grocery stores and gas stations, cook and serve at our restaurants, and many other jobs that pay less
Josh, your time is up. Thank you. Next, we have Jeremy Gilchrist.
All right, this is Jeremy Gilchrist from 710 Sasser Street. Greetings from the gentrified front on the edges of what was once tiny town. The former inhabitants of that community were non-ceremoniously sacrificed on the altar of capitalism. I'm only here to witness the tech bro and wine mom aftermath because I'm renting from a family member who's owned one of the few legacy homes remaining here since the 80s. The gentrification of Tiny Town and other predominantly Black and brown communities in Raleigh are all manifestations of systemic racism perpetrated by this council and mayor who falsely claim to embody welcoming ideals while ultimately being wolves in sheep's clothing as they cash in developer dollars. This reminds me of MLK's famous words in Letter from the Birmingham Jail regarding the white moderate who is often more dangerous to Black and brown folks than those who are openly racist. That is playing out today in Raleigh. Of course, you can't have the gentrification you desire without police targeting those Black and brown communities to drive out folks in favor of more affluent and more pasty people such as myself. This council has voted to increase the budget of the Raleigh police despite demands for increased investment in existing communities who are hurting the most, especially during a pandemic. This is the same Raleigh Police Department that most recently murdered Daniel Torcios, a Salvadorian man who suffered a terrible accident on the side of I-440 while trying to get home to his family. It should be noted that before he was shot dead, he was tased by the murderer of Keith Collins, who somehow still serves on the force, and was caught on audio during the 2020 George Floyd protest, expressing his enjoyment of targeting and going after protesters and brutalizing them. So what it comes down to is we need to vote the mayor out, replace the council with those who will end the madness and who will dismantle systems of white supremacy governing this municipality. It is my responsibility to use my white privilege to call this out, and that is exactly what I'm doing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Brandon Scaluna.
Hi, Brandon Scaluna, 10260 Strom Avenue. Everyday residents of the United States, non-white residents in particular, are forced to grapple with the constant threat to community safety known as police violence. Residents of Raleigh are no different, living under the jurisdiction of a police force which has shot 9 people since 2019, killing 6. Daniel Torcios, a 43-year-old husband and father, was needlessly shot dead on the side of I-440 on January 11th. Daniel had just gone through a major traffic accident in which his car flipped multiple times, suffering a head injury so severe that he was rendered temporarily unconscious. It is almost certain that he was in a state of disorientation when being confronted by officers and did not understand the commands being given to him. Despite the gun aimed at his face, he turned around and began walking away, de-escalating the situation a degree himself. Police responded with immediate re-escalation, immediately tasering him before multiple officers jumped on top of him. After standing up, he was shot and fell to the ground, where despite no longer being a threat, he was shot multiple times more in front of his wife and children, who will almost surely be dealing with the psychological effects of the situation for years to come. None of this was necessary. Police claim he had a pocket knife, although this is not shown clearly in available footage. Even still, Daniel was no longer a threat to police as soon as he turned his back and began to walk away. It is evident that there was still much opportunity to de-escalate. He most definitely was no longer a threat after already being shot once and falling to the ground. Some may claim that the officers did what was necessary and unavoidable. However, despite cities like London and Manchester having their fair share of problems involving knives, there was only one single fatal police shooting between April 31st, 2020 and May 1st, 2021 in all of England and Wales, which have a combined population of about 56 million people compared to not even 500,000 in Raleigh. While police in these countries are not nearly unproblematic, it is clear by analyzing officer-involved shooting data in these countries that it is not necessary to respond with lethal force towards individuals possessing knives. Between various officer-involved shootings and incidents such as Raleigh police using military-grade weapons on attendees of an MLK Day protest, it's clear that the lives of Raleigh minority populations are not valued by the Raleigh Police Department.
Your time is done, Brandon. Thank you. Next, we have Cole McMullen.
Cole McMullen, 10530 Sablewood Drive, Raleigh 27617. According to a Forbes article published in June 2020, more than $7 billion worth of excess U.S. military equipment has been transferred from the Department of Defense to federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, free of charge as part of its 1033 program since the early 90s. This militarization of police departments has had a negative impact on the relationships between police and the citizens they are said to protect. Equipping police with military-grade equipment contributes to a militarization of police attitudes towards their own communities. Over the past several years, we have seen this militarization of police attitudes play out on camera across the nation and in our own city of Raleigh. Far too many situations have resulted in the deaths of Americans that otherwise may have been avoided were it not for the ease with which use of force is escalated and violent tactics put into action by the police. Guns are not a defensive tool, nor a tool of de-escalation, nor a tool of public safety. The lion's share of military equipment received from the Department of Defense are not tools of de-escalation or tools designed to protect citizens from police violence. Cases of police misconduct are investigated internally by other police with very little, if any, oversight from the communities in which those police serve. Under such a system, there is little hope of reconciliation between police and the families of loved ones victimized by police violence. It is unfair to both police officers and community members to continue such a flawed system. It is time for the City of Raleigh to begin discussions aimed at transitioning the roles and responsibilities of public safety away from RPD into a Department of Public Safety that is operated by officers by an elected board responsible for misconduct, implementing changes.
Your time is up, Cole. Thank you. Next, we have Edie Jeffries.
Edie Jeffries, 1619 Sunrise Avenue. I'm chair of the non-city supported 5-point CAC. We've met every month on Zoom for the last 2 years after the city withdrew its support. Our meetings are recorded and available to everyone. Our mail list and meetings are open to the public. During our meetings of the last 2 years, we've learned about crime in the 5 Points area. We've learned about new parks and development in Raleigh. We've learned about neighbors working on programs in the neighborhood that could benefit other neighbors. We've learned about development cases and city programs and proposals and 5 points and citywide. We've discussed rezoning cases with developers and their representatives. We've helped neighbors who've had issues with rezoning cases negotiate with developers to improve the conditions being proposed. You haven't stopped us from assembling and sharing information. You haven't stopped us from deciding on our own leadership. All you've done by eliminating city sponsorship is eliminating the valuable conduit of information and input for citizens from some of the parts of the city that haven't managed to establish a similar structure of their own. You should reinstate the CACs and help them improve where help is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Marilee Jacobson.
Yes, my name is Marilee Jacobson, and I live at 1212 Cortland Drive, which is located in the Mordecai community. I've been active in our community since the mid-1990s and have especially enjoyed serving as the secretary, annual picnic chair, and currently as the co-chair of the Mordecai CAC. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Mordecai CAC tonight, but my comments are based on 27 years of experience with that grassroots organization. 2 years after the council chose to sever its relationship with the CACs, many of those 19 organizations are still working hard to connect neighbors to each other and to city services. We collectively draw upon almost 50 years of experience with how to get things done, and we share that experience widely. We are community engagement at its finest. I applaud the hiring of Taisha Hinton, and I wish her well as she tries to engage citizens in new and creative ways. I hope, however, that the council will give her leeway to suggest that the CACs remain partners with the city as we work to make Raleigh a place where every citizen feels that their voice is important in shaping the place we call home. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Larry Helfont.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and staff. I live at 1013 Thoreau Drive in Raleigh, 27609. This is an election year, finally, a time to list your accomplishments and plans for the future of Raleigh. I've seen your claims to fame, and there is one accomplishment that is missing: your removal of city support for CACs. Maybe we should have seen it coming. The mayor was very clear when running for office in September 2019. When asked if she would follow the recommendations of CACs and public advisory boards, her response was adamant: no, and the current methods of engagement could be better. Her alternative was to expand city outreach to reach more citizens using new methods and modern technology. It's been 2 years and the public is still waiting. So let's look forward. Just a few months after election, a closed-door meeting was held to decide the fate of CACs. Shortly thereafter, a council vote was taken. Result: one barrier to rezoning and future development in Raleigh gone. No discussion, no public input. The mayor was consistent and true to her vision for the city as proposed in 2019. So where are we now? After hiring a consultant at 4 times the previous CAC budget, only one of his recommendations was enacted: created Department of Community Engagement. The council continues to thank the new director without providing direction or support. The department has a staff of 2 to serve a population of 500,000 people. Meanwhile, CACs have not gone away. While not as present throughout the city as they were before, they are well beyond the 7 attendees that the mayor referenced in 2019. CACs still provide an open, welcome forum for their respective neighborhoods. Here's a novel approach for the mayor and council. Attend the CAC meeting, where you can listen, have a conversation, and engage with your constituents. Now that would be a worthy accomplishment that would actually benefit the city and residents of Raleigh. One final note: Midtown has 2 counselors, 2 at-large counselors, and we had 1 counselor attend 1 meeting for 1 year.
Thank you, Larry. Your time is up. Next, we have Shane Collins.
Yes, thank you. Shane Collins, 1205 Country Ridge Drive, Raleigh. Thank you, Mayor, City, and staff. I'm commenting on the text changes relating to the live-work businesses, and that's TC 1221 and TC 1121 related to parking regulations. I live between North Hills and Quail Corners developments, both of which presented plans to the city, residents, and neighborhoods via CACs, which no longer exist. So with the new text change regulations, Where would these customers of the neighborhood pop-up businesses park? In the street, on the lawn, or just drive by a pickup window from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week? There's no minimal parking requirement. Customers would just mill around the businesses on foot, driving by, clogging up streets, creating congestion for fire and police. The proposed text changes will put the safety and comfort of our communities at risk by bypassing all restrictions and neighborhood protections, by allowing unregulated businesses and unwanted traffic congestion visitors to enter our neighborhoods from 6 to 11 every day and night. I did not purchase a home next to a gym, nail salon, sweepstakes parlor, burger joint, manufacturing plant, clock shop, or art studio because I wanted to live in a bedroom community, not a strip mall. There would be no regulation of these neighborhood pop-up businesses because the neighborhoods were not set up for pop-up businesses, and homeowners would flee these areas, creating blighted areas which would not give tax to the city, all because of text changes, stripping neighborhoods of their community feel and purpose. Please reconsider the impact these text changes will have on the neighborhoods we live in. Think what it would be like to live next to a burger joint or sweepstakes parlor in your neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jane Harrison.
When it comes to staying in touch, Raleigh has been through some tough years. The COVID-19 situation has left many people isolated, and how we engage as a community is a critical question. In February 2020, the City Council severed the city's long-standing relationship with CACs, and it is past time to reconsider the impacts of this decision and how we move forward. As folks know, CACs are neighborhood-based umbrella organizations that represent the interests of area residents. They help Raleighites stay informed of changes proposed or planned for their neighborhoods. The West Raleigh CAC, which represented my area, was inactive for 18 months after this decision, contributing to a loss of communication among neighbors. That meant we were not likely to hear from developers, city staff, and councilors before a zoning decision was made. We missed out on opportunities to come together to advance pedestrian safety, reduce crime, improve stormwater infrastructure, invest in our parks, hold community events, and provide input on city planning. Many of the original CACs remain active regardless of city support. But what about those that no longer meet? I implore you to consider how to share resources equitably and empower neighbors to connect with one another and the city. The West Raleigh CAC, now known as the Community Advocacy Council for West Raleigh, is just getting back on its feet, starting back up last fall. And I'm grateful for the neighbors that have made this possible. I invite all of you to attend our meetings on the fourth Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. You can also connect with us on Facebook at West RAL CAC. Our next meeting is February 22nd, and we hope to see you there.
Thank you. And next we have Laura Ritchie.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. I'm at 3312 Avent Ferry Road and just wanted to echo the support for recognizing the CACs again. I think they're a great way for residents to give feedback, and it would be wonderful if we could see them come back. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, that is completion of public comment for this evening. We'll now go to public hearings. The first hearing is a street closing, STC 1121, portions of Granite Quarry Drive right away. No one has signed up to speak in opposition.
Good evening. This is Ann Conlon with Transportation. Thank you. Okay. So this, make sure I can. Okay. This closure is for portions of Granite Quarry Drive, which is a future street that was dedicated originally envisioned to be a roundabout intersection design. The development has been revised and is now anticipating a traditional intersection design. So you can see the remnants here that they are seeking to close. This right-of-way was originally platted in 2007, and the latest subdivision to develop 83 townhomes under the revised street design is now approved pending the street closure, and staff has reviewed the closure and found it to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. These are the plan policies. So in general, we have found consistency and that it's in the public interest. Happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions of staff? Okay, I am then going to open the public hearing. Worth Mills has signed up to speak in support. Is Worth on the line?
Yes, Mayor, I'm sorry. I am having some technical. Let me get it work.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. This is Worth Mills on behalf of the owner of the parcels adjacent to this traffic circle. If you could go to slide 2, perfect, that's great. So again, just to recap what Ms. Conlon said, this traffic circle was initially dedicated in 2007 with the shops at Battle Bridge, which is anchored by Food Lion. The parcel that houses the shopping center was further subdivided in 2010, and this is the current lot configuration today. Next slide. So the owner of these parcels has proposed to remove portions of that traffic circle to create a 4-way intersection. That intersection is going to lead to both Rock Quarry Road and Battle Bridge Road through the existing public access easements that were granted during the development of the shops at Battle Bridge. Next slide. And the owners have submitted an 83-unit townhouse subdivision in March 2021 and was approved January 20th. This right-of-way abandonment is a condition of that subdivision approval. And I'll just note that this abandonment facilitates more housing within walking distance of an existing commercial center and creates a safer street network for those future residents. Happy to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for Worth? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion?
Move for approval, Madam Mayor.
Okay, do we have a second? Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. All in favor, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Okay, that is unanimous, clerk. Next is rezoning Z-68-20, Hillsborough Street, Bagwell Avenue.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm Bynum Walter from Raleigh Planning and Development. Our first rezoning public hearing this evening is a continuation from your previous meeting on January 18th. The original request here that you considered during that public hearing was a rezoning to a combination of CX7 and RX3. The applicant has asked that you close the hearing and schedule a new hearing. They want to revise the case. The most significant change that they propose to make to the case would be to limit the building height across the site to no more than 5 stories, but they're also proposing to remove some zoning conditions which would make the request less restrictive. So they want to remove the condition now that prohibits more than 3 bedrooms in an apartment unit, and they also want to remove some provisions for height management on the north side of the site in what would previously have been the negotiating that transition down from 7 to 3 stories. So again, they're asking for you to close the case and schedule a new public hearing so that they can revise.
Okay, no one has signed up to speak tonight in opposition, but we do have Michael Birch on the line. Going to just ask if there's an update on his end.
Yes, Madam Mayor, thank you. So since we have submitted those revised conditions, we have also met with a group folks that live on Bagwell in the larger neighborhood. That occurred last Thursday evening. They asked us to consider some additional conditions, and we have been evaluating those since that meeting. And so we continue to do so and anticipate actually adding some additional conditions. And so we would ask that the council actually hold open the hearing tonight instead of closing it, but hold it open tonight, continue it to the meeting on February 15th. That will allow us to submit those revised conditions. And then at that time, you would be able to schedule the new public hearing on the full set of conditions. So that is our ask, that it be kept open until the 15th of February so that we can add those conditions.
Okay, City Attorney, that would be the appropriate course.
That is an appropriate course for you to take, so you can do that, yes.
Okay, then let's hold this open until February 15th, and where we will hear again from the applicant, and we will reschedule the public hearing at that time.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Rezoning Z-21-21, Six Forks Road.
Yes, ma'am. This is a request to rezone just under 14 acres from R1 to RX4 with conditions. The Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District would remain. Nonetheless, the request is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. Planning Commission did recommend approval. As you can see, this is at the northeast corner of Six Forks and Strickland. It's in the Watershed Protection Overlay District now, which generally recommends no greater residential density than R1. An aerial view of the site here. So they proposed some conditions here. They've basically prohibited commercial use. You know, RX, the base district that they're requesting would allow some commercial use typically. They're providing some provisions for conditions for exterior lighting, and then they are also specifying location of building in relationship to adjacent residential properties and limiting building height. They're set up for specifications around a neighborhood transition, setting a maximum number of units, and a number of stormwater related conditions here, as well as some limits around parking between the building and the street, and then further provisions around building access to the street, really mimicking the parking limited frontage here, a provision for a dogway station, and a provision for traffic analysis at the time of site plan. So you can see here the residential density is increasing with this request significantly. So significantly exceed the density suggested by the Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District and the Falls Watershed plan. This is inconsistent with the institutional designation on the site on the future land use map, consistent with a number of policies, but the strength of that area plan policy, the Falls Lake secondary watershed density, that's really one of the more important policies in our area plan collection, and it's enough to tip this the whole case to be inconsistent. Planning Commission recommends approval. I spoke with the applicant this afternoon. I believe he has been working with the neighbors to pursue some additional zoning conditions. I would also say that staff has had some additional conversation about this case today and would ask that you, after you open the hearing, that you continue it to the next meeting so that we can bring back some additional information for you about the Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District and the Falls Watershed Plan.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Bynum? Councilmember Cox and then Councilmember Buffkin.
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but I am very concerned about the proposed density for this development in our drinking water watershed. This is not just for this development, but it sets a precedent for significantly increasing the density everywhere in our watershed, Falls Lake watershed. And I think that's unacceptable. We were in a drought a few years ago. and our water supply was in jeopardy at that time. We've not taken any actions to expand our sources of drinking water. We've continued to tax Falls Lake by drawing more water from that lake. And I just think that this is going to set a terrible precedent that if we're going to expand density to this degree in this location, then we can expect that other developers will come along and want that same consideration elsewhere in the watershed. So my intention is to vote against this rezoning.
Councilmember Buffkin, did you have a question for Bynum?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. So, Ms. Walters, in addition to some of the background history and application of the Falls watershed protections in this case, could staff also look at the eligibility of the parcel for water and sewer connections and incorporate that into your into a report or memo that we could look at our next council meeting?
Yes, sir. We'd be very happy to.
Thank you. And then just a brief comment, if I may, Mayor. This is a weighty policy decision. It does have implications beyond this case, and I hope that all the council members will receive this memo from staff and give it a careful, thoughtful review. We've got an important decision here. Our city needs more housing, and this proposal would bring a lot of more housing units. We also have the need to protect our drinking water, and we need to consider carefully the effect that this decision might have on other jurisdictions that we're also relying on to protect our drinking water. So it's an important case. It may be that we can get assurances that an engineering solution could give us the protections we need, but it may be that we need to take a closer look at some of the policy issues. So we will have time to do that. We'll also hear tonight from the applicant and from the adjoining neighbors, and you'll hear there's been a very constructive conversation going on, and there's been give and take on both sides. And I think that you will be impressed with what you hear from both sides, and look forward to continuing our conversation in 2 weeks. And when it's all said and done, Mayor, I will ask that we hold the hearing open and continue this case to February 14th.
Okay. Thank you. Well, first we will hear, I'm going to open the public hearing. First we will hear from Collier Marsh. There's also Scott Milkey and Justin Brown who have signed up to speak. And I believe we have Andy Pettish on the line to speak on behalf of the neighbors. So thank you. I'm just going to remind everybody 8 minutes per side.
Good evening, Mayor Baldwin and members of the council. I'm Collier Marsh with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street on behalf of the applicant. We're excited to finally bring this proposal to the council tonight. This rezoning has been much more involved than most. It's not been a months-long process by our team, but it's been a years-long process. Included a bunch of different meetings with the surrounding neighborhood, several on-site meetings, and several meetings with city staff. Our project reflects great participation from the community, and it includes extensive commitments to ensure its compatibility with the surrounding area and with the watershed. So we're looking at the subject property now. It's 8916 Six Forks Road, 13.8 acres. We're at the intersection of Six Forks and Strickland, so two major roads, and also just south of the interchange between Six Forks and 540. Next slide, please. So there are dense mixed uses to the west and to the south. The other corners of the same intersection are zoned for mixed use with heights of 3 to 5 stories, and then heights are zoned up to 7 stories just south on Six Forks Road. So the site's prominent location with dense mixed uses surrounding it triggers a number of comprehensive plan policies that support high density development at this site that matches the surrounding 3 to 7 story development. Next slide, please. But the Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District, which is marked by the blue line here, and the related Falls Lake Small Area Plan trigger conflicting policies that have a major impact when we look at this site. So that land above the blue line is within the watershed, and the land below the blue line is not. The watershed on its own imposes a number of strict limits on development. Total built area of the site cannot exceed 30% of the site. 40% of the site has to be forested area. So here that's at least 5.53 acres would be forested. And then there are stricter stormwater control measures that apply to areas outside the watershed. Small area plan policies referenced by Bynum also call for low density residential development that's at odds with the policies triggered by the site's prominent location. Next slide, please. So these conflicting policies are reflected by the future land use map. So the other three corners of the intersection are designated as community mixed use, calls for dense development up to 5 stories. In contrast, as we move northeast, property is designated as rural residential, representing or reflecting the Falls Lake low density policies. But our site is designated as institutional, and that reflects the conflicting policies that apply to this property. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the comprehensive plan's description for the institutional designation. It calls for colleges, universities, large schools, and even hospitals. So the comprehensive plan also specifically states that smaller institutional uses are not mapped on the future land use map. What that means is that where this applies, a large-scale dense use is contemplated. So we've got a conflict between the future land use map and the small area plan, and it puts us in a bind when we try to rezone the site. We can't satisfy both. And if we request one side or the other, we'd be in conflict with the alternative. So what we've done is we've tried to strike the best possible compromise with our request using 2 guiding principles throughout the process. First, the project must be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And second, that we must not only meet, but we must exceed the Falls watershed requirements. Next slide, please. So as noticed for tonight's hearing, we're proposing an RX4 CU designation with 13 zoning conditions. I want to pause here though and note 2 things. First, we did start with an RX5 CU designation. We moved to 4 stories after discussions with the neighborhood. We've continued those discussions, even continuing them today, and expect to continue them into the week. And we'll actually be submitting updated conditions that would reflect an RX3 designation with accompanying modified zoning conditions. But I do want to quickly review each of the currently submitted conditions. Generally, they ensure compatibility of the surrounding area by limiting permitted development, requiring substantial buffers. They set a strong precedent for development in the watershed by exceeding the watershed requirements. Next slide, please. So we have 5 conditions that limit the allowed development to ensure neighborhood compatibility. The first limits uses to residential uses. The second requires light shielding and reduction of light pole heights. The third sets a maximum of 200 residential units. Fourth, a TIA has to be performed. And fifth, there must be at least 2 dog waste stations on the site. Next slide, please. 3 conditions ensure there's substantial buffers between our development and the neighboring community. The first provides 100-foot vegetative buffer and no building zone. The second was intended to create a transition in height with the 3-story height limit in the 100 to 150-foot zone. Now, keep in mind, we're prepared to offer a 3-story limit across the entire site. And then the third condition requires a shrub wall at least 5 feet tall at planting. Next slide, please. So this next slide shows the cumulative impact of those buffer conditions as well as the existing watershed requirements. The 100-foot vegetated buffer, no building shown as green. The 3-story zone is shown in yellow. The expected built area is shown in orange. It's wrapped by our proposed hedge wall. Recall that the Falls watershed limits built area to 30% and requires 40% forested area. So although the built area shown here is conceptual, the watershed restrictions coupled with our conditions give a clear indication of where development would go. The forested area will be kept at the rear of the site to meet that 40% requirement, and driveways will be as short as possible because frankly they count towards that maximum built area. So our development gets squeezed as close to the intersection of 6 Forks and Strickland as we can possibly make it, which creates one of the most significant buffers that I've been a part of for this type of development. Next slide, please. I think most importantly, we have 3 conditions that exceed the Falls watershed requirements. We've committed to a maximum of 29% impervious coverage, and then to use green stormwater infrastructure such as pervious paver systems for at least 1% of the built area, which equates to more than 6,000 square feet. The next 2 conditions can commit to extremely stringent stormwater controls. The Falls watershed, as I mentioned, already has more stringent stormwater requirements. But we're exceeding those by doubling the amount of rainfall volume retainage on the site and controlling stormwater for the 25 and 100-year storms. Next slide, please. We also have 2 conditions that mimic elements of the feasible portions of parking limited frontage to ensure compatibility with urban form. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes the staff report's findings for the rezoning. I should note there's not overwhelming inconsistency here. Staff found that we're consistent with urban form, compatible with the property, the surrounding area, and consistent with 8 policies. The inconsistency found by staff is minimal, and in fact, it conflicts with itself. The remaining inconsistency is that we're inconsistent with the institutional designation, but then also inconsistent with the low-density residential policies in the Falls watershed. Nevertheless, we tackled these questions head-on at the Committee of the Whole with the Planning Commission, and with the conditions currently submitted, the Planning Commission ultimately unanimously recommended approval of this rezoning. But as noted earlier, we're prepared to continue updating this request to ensure further compatibility. Next slide, please. We recognize that there are concerns this case sets a precedent for development in the watershed, and while sites and prominent locations like this one are few and far between in the watershed, we've worked to ensure that our project sets a strong precedent for development. So although the overlay district already imposes those strict limits, we've exceeded them in 3 different ways. We're compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and we've pushed development to that intersection of Six Forks and Strickland. We're also more compatible than the institutional designation called for by the future land use map. Some of those uses are far more intense than we're proposing and far worse for the watershed. And we think providing residential units is appropriate here. And then finally, our request is consistent with a large number of comprehensive plan policies. And if you'll turn to the next slide, these are the 23 policies that we've identified that are consistent with our request. We're prepared to update our rezoning proposal, as I've mentioned, and we're happy to answer any questions the council may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions for Collier before we continue the hearing with Andy? Okay, I would ask that the timer be set for 8 minutes, and we have Andy on the line.
Thank you, Mayor Baldwin, members of council. Andy Pettish, Pettish Law, 127 West Hargett Street, here on behalf of my client, Redham Oaks Homeowners Association. I've been working closely with them and to an additional extent, members of that subdivision and community, and been in close communication with Collier and the developer applicant here on this project. And I do want to note at the outset that I appreciate and my client appreciates the efforts that both the applicant and their attorney Collier Marsh have made to listen to community concerns, make good faith efforts to address concerns and keep communication open during that time. I would note that there are some significant general concerns about development in that area, the density, traffic issues, and of course the protection of the Falls watershed that are ongoing. With that said, this community and the HOA understands that meeting the demands of growth in Raleigh are a reality, and to that end, we have worked and are continuing to work with the developer and the applicant to address and fine-tune issues and solutions, and that remains ongoing. And as this, there's been a request to keep this public hearing open, and while we're still working on that, I would ask that if the council were so inclined, to allow me to reserve the remaining time that I have to comment on this when we come back, assuming we do on the 15th and this public hearing is still open, to report back on where we ended up in those discussions and bring you kind of a final position with respect to the HOA in this rezoning case.
Andy, would we probably start over again with the new conditions, so you'll have full 8 minutes to respond?
Very good. Then that works out well, and I won't take any more of the council's time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what we've been asked to do is continue this for 2 weeks and leave this open so staff can deal with questions that have been asked. And so we will reschedule this for the 15th of February. Or continue it to the 15th of February. Okay.
Thank you.
Next is rezoning Z-52-21, West Morgan Street.
Yes, ma'am. This is really close to where I am right now. And most of you, I think, also are in the building, just not in the chamber with me. So this is a request to rezone just under an acre from DX12 with a shopfront frontage to DX40 with that same shopfront frontage and some conditions. So this is the northwest corner of West Morgan and South Harrington Street. The request is consistent with the 2030 comprehensive plan and the future land use map, and Planning Commission recommends approval. So here's this site in question. It's immediately west of the Dawson, and there are a couple of other recent cases very nearby from this past year and the year before that were very similar in scale that we have called out here just as a reminder about what's going on in the neighborhood. So here's a view of the site. There are a couple of buildings there currently, and they have provided some conditions here. So they're limiting uses. They are providing for screening of parking deck structure and also some regulation, self-imposed regulation around lighting for the parking deck as well. They have specified an area adjacent to the Dawson that will not contain buildings, dumpsters, loading docks, other kinds of things associated with their development that might be objectionable to the Dawson. And then they have also provided for a 10-foot step back along the eastern property line above any structured parking for a building that's 13 stories or more. And again, that's about the relationship to the Dawson. So what is happening on the site? What does this request get them? It gets them a lot more residential density, gets them an increase in possible office square footage, but likely pretty steady retail entitlement. So this is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. And the only inconsistent policies we have noted here are related to infill compatibility and public realm amenities associated with high density development. And the Planning Commission recommends approval. What questions could I answer for you before you open the public hearing and hear from the applicant and neighbors?
Does anyone have any questions of Bynum? Okay, I am then going to open the public hearing. If we could have the countdown timer on, starting at 8 minutes. Speaking in support, we have signed up Matt Paul, Eric Wright, Laurent de Marcon, and Ray Dixon.
Eric Wright is speaking first.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, council members. My name is Eric Wright, 1265 Scottsville Road, Rochester, New York. I'm the Vice President of Construction for Wilmerite. Wilmerite's a third-generation family-run company based in Rochester, New York, with more than 80 years experience in real estate development and construction. We've developed in every major real estate class. Our most recent project brought us to the Triangle region, which was a student housing project completed in 2020 adjacent to Duke University. We're very excited to continue our growth in the Triangle region and more specifically in the warehouse district of Raleigh. We feel that there's a lot of potential for high-end housing in this market and feel that our site is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. We've worked over the past few months with the adjacent property owners to understand their concerns and address them to the extent possible. And I'll turn it over to Mac to give a little more information on that.
Good evening, Mac Paul, Morningstar, 421 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of Wilmerite. We have a presentation, but I'm just going to hold it. We do have some examples downtown of similar situations with properties, as well as the shadow studies we were conducting at Planning Commission. And as you heard, Barrett Dixon and Laurent with Jay Davis are here for answering any questions you might have. So I'm just going to hit the highlights. As you heard, this site is at the epicenter where the city has been working over many years to encourage more development. It's in the core transit area, walkable to Raleigh Union Station. It scores off the charts with the walk, transit, and bike scores, and it's within walking distance of Weaver Street. However, we also recognize now, we had very little residential in downtown Raleigh 20 years ago, and it is finally starting to fill in. We're in situations where development is coming, where there is development finally. And that was something we recognized early on. The Dawson was built a number of years ago, adjacent to the east. And so we reached out to the HOA before this was filed, and led to a number of conversations and meetings over a number of months. And we really appreciate the interaction and constructive suggestions from residents. We visited condominium units and walked the site, and we obviously knew, particularly those who live on the west side of the development there at the Dawson, that this would impact them. It's already zoned DX20. Building could be put right up to the property line, so we wanted to see, knowing regardless what happens, there will be an impact on their view shed, what might be done. Planning Commission focused on the building setback, asking us to look at that, as well as the space in between the buildings, public realm, conducting a number of shadow studies, which we did, and we also met with the Urban Design Center. And so that led to the conditions that you heard. We are setting the building back a minimum 15 feet. The Dawson's 5 feet back from their side, so that's a minimum of 20 feet. We know it will probably be more than 15 feet, but not having done the design yet, we don't want to find a situation where we're off by a foot and can't build the building. So that's, again, the minimum. And we also committed to ensuring that space in between is quiet. It could be a gathering place with the active uses along Morgan Street. And that was something that was important to the folks on that side of the building, as well as an additional step back above the parking garage level. So through that process, as you heard, the Planning Commission recommended in favor, and we would respectfully ask for your support this evening. Thank you. And again, happy to answer questions and show you any of the studies that were done previously.
Sorry about that. Does anybody have any questions for the applicant? Okay, let's go to those who have signed up in opposition. I believe this is a family. Wendy Oppenheimer, Ashish Berganza, and Chloe Berganza.
Good evening.
Yes, so hold on one second, please. I'm sorry. Okay, we have the timer set at 8 minutes. Thank you, Wendy. Please proceed.
Yes, sorry. Good evening, and thank you so much, Mayor Baldwin and distinguished council members, for your service to the city of Raleigh. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about rezoning case Z-52-21. My name is Wendy Oppenheimer, and I live at the Dawson Condominium Building, which is located at 317 West Morgan Street in the Warehouse District of downtown Raleigh. My husband, our daughter, and I purchased our family's home at the Dawson nearly a decade ago in 2013. The Dawson is directly adjacent to the rezoning properties 323 and 327 West Morgan Street. Next slide, please. We are respectfully requesting that the City Council vote to defer this case for more discussion and ideally refer it to the Committee for Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Communities to allow sufficient time for the neighbors to work with the applicant on a mutually agreeable set of conditions for the rezoning. There was insufficient time in Planning Commission to collaborate on revised conditions. The Planning Commission deferred the case on November 23rd until their next meeting on December 14th, which meant the applicant had to work with neighbors and submit revised conditions by December 3rd. Because the collaboration window fell over the Thanksgiving holiday, the applicant did not have enough time and was unable to share revised conditions and massing studies with the neighbors before the December 3rd deadline, as Planning Commission had requested and expected. The applicant's counsel, Mr. Paul, sent neighbors the revised conditions after they were submitted to the Planning Commission on December 3rd, so there was no ability to collaborate on them, which was unacceptable. The calendar illustrated on this slide shows how there was insufficient time with practically just 1 week to collaborate. The deadline on the 3rd boxed out in green, and the conditions were submitted to us around 5:30 p.m. after they had been submitted to Planning Commission. Therefore, we could not collaborate effectively. The applicant, Wilmerite Construction, as mentioned earlier by Eric Wright, is a New York developer. What he did not also share is that they specialize in shopping malls and casinos. They have no prior development expertise in the city of Raleigh. They do in other parts of the triangle, as mentioned. And they've been very difficult to work with and dismissive of the residents, at least at the Dawson and Raleigh. Perhaps they can treat neighbors badly in rezoning cases in New York, but as a guest in our city, I would expect better of them. The lack of sufficient time to collaborate on conditions was discussed at length during the December 14th Planning Commission review of this case, which lasted about 45 minutes. Commissioner Bennett specifically expressed the frustration that there was not enough time to consider this case in Planning Commission and that the conditions that have been offered by the applicant are less than ideal. Commissioner Bennett said there should be more time allocated for discussion on this case. Next slide, please. Rezoning case Z-52-21 is unique and unlike the other DX40 cases in the warehouse district, since the rezoning properties are directly adjacent to the Dawson, which is an established 66-unit owner-occupied residential building built to code in 2005 with approximately 40 unprotected windows and 10 unprotected balconies on the western facade. None of the previous 4 DX40 rezoning cases approved since 2015 in the warehouse district are directly adjacent to legacy residential homes. The Dawson was constructed in a different era, and unfortunately, the Unified Development Ordinance does not define a reasonable distance between legacy buildings and new buildings being developed, which results in harm to legacy buildings via the city's under-evolved building codes. Therefore, the expectation of the Dawson residents is that our legacy building be protected in this rezoning process via a comprehensive set of conditions that we have, since we have major concerns about the negative impacts of the DX40 rezoning approval directly adjacent to our 5-story residential building. We're only able to support the DX40 rezoning application if a comprehensive set of protective conditions that fully address the neighbors' reasonable concerns are adopted by the applicant in exchange for increased height entitlement from DX12 to DX40. Mr. Paul misspoke moments ago when he said that the current rezoning is, or the current property is zoned for DX20. It's DX12 as noted in his application. Next slide, please. In order to protect our legacy residential buildings, 40 windows and 10 balconies on the western facade, we're requesting the following reasonable conditions. A setback distance of 30 feet on the east side of the rezoning property. On the western side of the Dawson, access to natural light will be fully blocked all day by a new building up to 8 times our height unless there's a reasonable setback size. The rezoning property is 160 feet across on West Morgan Street, and per the UDO, the maximum setback could be 32 feet, which is 20% of the shop front footage. The applicant is only offering a 15-foot setback, less than half the possible setback distance. The second condition we're requesting is prohibit building service and maintenance items on the east side of the rezoning property. The neighbors are requesting items like dumpsters, loading docks, exhaust vents, et cetera, be prohibited on the east side of the building since they would erode the quality of life and practical use of the many bedrooms that face the rezoning property just several feet away. We've asked the applicant to locate these service items to the south, west, or north of their property instead, since those sides of their property face bars and restaurants, which will be far less impacted by those items than our homes. You'll note that in the conditions, it was only stated that they would prohibit those items within the 15-foot setback, but they can build them an inch after that facing our building. And thirdly, we'd like to define the height of the garage and tower on the east side of the rezoning property. We're requesting that the garage height be limited to 3 stories and that the tower height above it be limited to 20 stories on the east side of the rezoning property. The applicant can certainly build a taller garage structure and a second taller tower up to 40 stories on the west side of their property. Next slide, please. Our zoning and land use attorney from Womble Bond Dickinson and his team of land planners converted our concerns described on the prior slide into formal conditions language that was shared with the applicant and with the Planning Commission in December before the second Planning Commission meeting. City Council received a copy of the neighbors' requested conditions in the letter I sent you last week. The applicant submitted conditions on December 3rd do not fully address the neighbors' concerns since the 2 versions of the conditions language are materially different on these key issues, as I mentioned earlier. The 2 sets of conditions have not been able to be synthesized yet since there was not enough time to work with the applicant on a revised set of conditions for rezoning case Z-52-21 coming out of the first Planning Commission meeting on November 23rd. Per Commissioner Bennett's feedback, we are respectfully requesting that the city vote to defer this case for more discussion and ideally refer it to the Committee for Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Communities to allow sufficient time for the neighbors to work with the applicant on a mutually agreeable set of reasonable protective conditions given the unique circumstances of this rezoning case. This concludes my comments in opposition, and I would like to reserve my remaining time for rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Ms. Oppenheimer? Okay. There are no questions. No questions for Councilmember Branch.
Yeah, just one question, because I heard the applicant stated they've talked to the HOA at the Dawson and they were in agreement. Did I hear something incorrectly? Is there applicant able to speak to that?
Yeah, hey, Councilor Branch, Mac, this is Mac. Paul, yes, I mean, we met with the HOA a number of times, and I can't speak for them. I mean, obviously, they're not here this evening. Some individuals communicated with the Planning Commission about the communication all along. So I'll just leave it at that, that we had a number of meetings, and they did not take any formal position that I'm aware of, one way or the other, on the rezoning case.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cox?
Yes, I met with Ms. Oppenheimer, and I heard the concerns of that she has and the other residents who are impacted by this development. I think it's kind of a shame that we don't have better guidance in the UDO about these distances between these tall buildings and existing residences, because it is a significant impact. It's interesting too. I happen to be from Rochester, New York. My ancestors settled in Rochester around 1810. And so I'm very familiar with Wilmerite. And I would appeal to Wilmerite to work with these residents. And because I do think they have legitimate concerns that's going to affect both their quality of life and the value of the homes that they live in. And unfortunately, we simply do not have in our UDO good regulations to specify better distances between existing residences and proposed residences, and that's something I'd like to see corrected in the future. So the way it stands right now, I would vote against this rezoning.
Any other questions? Councilmember Fort?
Not so much a question. I've had a couple conversations with Ms. Oppenheimer, and I've also had a chance to talk to Mr. Paul a few times, and I talked to them both last week, and I thought they were going to have some additional conversations between last week and our hearing tonight. And I'm not exactly sure what happened between the two of them or both sides, but I'm not sure those communications happened. I know Ms. Oppenheimer has requested that we hold it open for 2 more weeks for her to have an opportunity to talk to Mr. Paul and the applicant and see if they can hammer out some resolution for the remaining conditions. And so that would be my recommendation tonight.
I'm going to ask the question, was there outreach from the applicant to Ms. Oppenheimer?
Yes, I reached out both about a month ago after we provided our technical edited conditions to see if there were any questions, and then again after talking to Councilor Fort last week, and then heard back I think yesterday and replied back to her offering to meet. I think she may have had questions. She obviously can speak for herself about what the purpose of meeting. I said, obviously, we're open to any further dialogue and not wanting to unduly hold the meeting open if it's unnecessary to have that conversation. So again, I did reach out to her last week.
Could you review the conditions that you have submitted, especially as it relates to the east side of the building, what is prohibited?
Yes, one thing we did, like there's this model condition now on parking garages downtown, since there isn't a text change yet to deal with the screening, and we've all seen some of the examples that have caused concerns recently. But those only apply to the public street facade. So we also applied that to the east side facing the Dawson, and supplemented that with a parapet wall on the roof for lighting, as well as a green screen or mural that would completely screen that east side of the garage. So that was one thing. We set the building back on that side from the property line. We prohibited a number of uses that Ms. Oppenheimer mentioned, such as outdoor storage, loading docks, dumpsters, surface parking, exhaust vents. Now, those are in that 15-foot buffer area, and the building could be further back. But we, in talking to staff, felt that was the most enforceable way to draft that and deal with all the concerns about noise. And it is going to be a quiet area between the buildings. And then the additional step back was something that some of the neighbors I'm not asked about, and we really looked hard and did agree to a building step back, which doesn't again apply on interior sides of buildings under the UDO, only to the public facade. So we made it apply to the side of the building, so it steps back above the garage as it interfaces on that side with the Dawson. So those were the primary conditions. Again, I'm not aware of any other case to date that's done that. We looked at a lot of situations downtown just to see if there's anything comparable. And a lot of the new projects, like at Smoky Hollow or at One Glenwood, they all sort of anticipated future development might occur next to them. So a lot of the garages, the residential units are stepped back above the garage and not immediately up against the development, but they're old legacy buildings, older buildings that are right at the property line where new development can occur. The L is one example that we looked at. I have photographs, but it's only a 10-foot. The building with residential units that face west on the L are only about 10 feet back. So there, eventually will be a new significant development there next to it. So again, we understand, the concerns. Some buildings were built without as much anticipation for future development, and we're in that situation now, trying to manage as best we can, and that's what we worked on in collaboration. And it's kind of a zero-sum game from the setback, for instance. I mean, it'll be at least 20-foot separation. The neighbors would like it 50 feet back, but at a certain point, you can't build a building with a geometry to accommodate the circulation and all the things you need to do. So we certainly feel like we did what we could and still have a viable project.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question for Mr. Paul. So what, and I'm sure you said this before, but I missed it. So what will be the height of the building on the eastern side? What's the plan and proposal for the height of the building? And then as to a setback, what would it go to next in terms of height?
So we had a lot of massing studies, that all very much were similar in the situation. There's like you see downtown, there's a parking garage because development now generally has to accommodate their own parking on site. We don't have the public decks like we used to, so you could build buildings and rely on other parking. So the first number of levels, it could be 5, 6, 7 levels, would be a parking garage, and then there would be a slender multifamily building on top of that garage, situated somewhere toward the Harrington Street side, with some setback, a step back above that garage on the east side. You can envision that, and there would be some amenities on that level above the parking garage. And because the floor plate of multifamily is much narrower, it could be 8,000 to 13,000 square foot floor plate on that occupied part of the building, whereas the site, is 30,000, 35,000 square feet. So you can get a sense of the geometry of the building when you get above the garage level relative to the site overall. So that's really, the general program that you would see would be, a base with a garage accommodating the residents. And then there would be an active use on the street level on West Morgan. It could be a restaurant, it could be retail with the active storefronts.
So I did not hear what the height would be or the number of floors.
Well, I mean, do
you not know yet?
Total it would be somewhere probably between 20 and 30 stories. You're hearing these zonings to 40 stories because that's the level we have.
Okay. And I have a question. I think Ms. Oppenheimer will be able to answer this better. Well, I got two questions for you, Ms. Oppenheimer. How many residences back up to, or, well, maybe not back up, maybe that's the primary side. I don't think it is, but how many have are on that side of the building for the total building of the Dawson?
Yes, there are 10 homes. There are 10 discrete homes that are on the west side of the Dawson that would look out onto the rezoning property building. And on that western facade, if you want to bring back up an image from my earlier slide deck, it illustrates it for you. But there are 40 unprotected windows and 10 unprotected balconies on that side.
Okay, thank you. And how many floors of residences are on that side?
5.
Okay.
So it's a 5-story building. It's fully residential. It's a combination of 3-bedroom apartments, 2-bedroom apartments, and 1-bedroom apartments. And on that side, it's a composition of all of those square footage sizes that I mentioned. But there are bedroom windows facing the rezoning properties up and down the side of the building, left, right, and across. So if there's a, sorry, go ahead.
And even on the ground floor, those are residences on that side of the building?
On the ground floor is our gated garage parking. And then, so I guess ground floor, first floor is garage parking. And then the floors above that, 2 through 5 are residential.
Okay, thank you. Are you a member of the homeowners association?
I am. All residents are in effect members of the HOA. We pay fees for it and et cetera. I'm sort of the sole representative for the building, as it were. We've collectively participated in meetings, as Mr. Paul had mentioned earlier. I think my point of view reflects the point of view of the majority of the HOA. And I've been sort of the default spokesperson and point person for our building. We just have not formally, through the HOA, nominated an attorney. I took that upon myself to do it because sometimes buildings have, fractional parties, and it's difficult to herd all of the cats together. And because my home faces the western side, in particular, I've just taken the initiative to work and hire an attorney and put in hours upon hours of effort understanding all of this, and $35,000 in legal bills with Womble, which is so excessive just to protect my own home. So I would request some empathy and some consideration from council to extend the conversation with the applicant and their counsel to reach a mutually agreeable set of conditions. Because to your point, we still can't get a definite statement around what the building height is going to be on the east side. They're offering a step back, but there's no clear definition about where that will occur. It could be on the 13th floor, which wouldn't provide any relief to any of our residences, which are on the 5th floor and below. Which is why we're asking for some definition of the garage height and also of the tower height on the east side. Thank you.
Excuse me, are you a member of the HOA board?
I am not, no.
Okay.
Our HOA board, I should say, they should have recused the prior head. It's been complicated, the politics within our building, but the previous head of our HOA board should have recused himself, Chris Mutos, from this conversation. He is a restaurateur, is friends with Matt Paul, and has been unwilling to represent our HOA in a good faith manner in this particular rezoning case, because my understanding is that he is working in a side situation to try to secure himself a restaurant opportunity in the rezoning property. So he has a conflict of interest, and therefore the ability of the HOA to represent itself effectively was suboptimal, and therefore various residents who have the ability and the interest to pursue this more aggressively have done so.
Sorry, I just, and I had a question earlier that I thought you were going to get to, but you didn't answer it. So did the OHA intentionally not take
HOA.
a position on this? I'm sorry, yeah, the homeowner association did intentionally not take a position on this, or did it just not ever get to that point?
I think they intentionally didn't take a position on it because they could not formulate a position because of the conflict of interest of the head of the HOA.
All right, thank you.
But I would feel like residents of the building should not be penalized because of the dysfunction of our internal HOA politics.
I'm just going to say that's quite an accusation. And I would suggest that you have some conversations with your HOA board. I am going to cut off conversation now and ask that this be held for 2 weeks. I would ask that Ms. Oppenheimer this time reply to Mr. Paul and set up a meeting. So there is a conversation. And we will hear this in 2 weeks, which will be February 15th. I'm going to leave this open.
Thank you, Mayor Baldwin.
If we leave this open, City Attorney, we can close the hearing and vote on the 15th if we choose.
Yes, unless they want to add some more conditions.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. We will take this up at our meeting on the 15th. Rezoning Z-53-21 on Tryon Road.
Yes, ma'am. This is a request to rezone just over 10.5 acres from R10 with a special residential parking overlay district to RX4 with conditions in that same overlay. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan. However, it is inconsistent with the future land use map, and the Planning Commission recommends approval. You can see we're on the north side of Tryon Road here. Not too far, if I remember correctly, not too far from the Raleigh Golf Association. Yep, there we go. Sorry, having a little bit of a trigger finger thing. Sorry. A couple of views of the site. They have provided a couple of conditions here, so they're limiting density to no more than 25 units an acre, and they have limited their uses to single unit and 2-unit living and multi-unit living. So the change here is that the residential entitlement goes up significantly, not quite 100% increase there, and then your setbacks do modify as well with the request to the RX4 district. I'm really sorry about the slides. So this is inconsistent with the moderate density, moderate scale residential designation. So a future land use map amendment would be, no, I'm sorry, it's not, because it's not double inconsistent. I apologize. But it is inconsistent with current designation. A couple of consistent policies here, and then inconsistency with the future land use map and zoning consistency policy, zoning of annexed lands, reinforcing the urban pattern and infill compatibility. There would be an amendment, and it would go to medium scale from moderate scale residential. Planning Commission recommends approval, and I'm happy to answer questions you might have about the case before you open the public hearing.
Any questions of Bynum? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. No one has signed up to speak in opposition. Signing up in support is Mark Frederick, Matt Gross, and Mark Matthews. So if we could hear from the applicant.
Good evening, Mayor Baldwin and members of council. I'm Mark Frederick with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street on behalf of the applicant. Also on the line tonight from the development team, we have Mark Matthews with Trammell Crow Residential and Matt Gross with Kinley Horn. We did prepare a presentation for you all tonight and are happy to run through it. But with nobody signed up to speak in opposition, we're also willing to simply be available for questions if that is the direction council would like to take.
Does anybody have any questions? All right, I'm going to close the hearing then. Do we have a motion?
Yes, it would be my motion, and I will say there were some questions from some folks in the community, but I think their issues have been addressed by planning staff and the applicant. So I think I'll be making a motion to approve. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated February 1st, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action. This approval is also deemed to be an amendment of the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Okay, do we have a second? Councilmember Buffkin has seconded. All in favor? Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. Thank you. Okay, next we have rezoning Z-69-21. This is Bloodworth, Davy, Hargett, Martin in person. With one person signed up to speak in opposition, and this was a staff-initiated rezoning.
That's exactly right. Yes, ma'am. So this is for city-owned parcels near Moore Square. You can see those highlighted on the map here. There are parcels on the west side of South Bloodworth Street, which is east of Moore Square, and then on the west side of Person Street, south of Moore Square. And the request across the board is for DX12 height. The parcels south of Moore Square would have a shop front frontage, and the parcels east of Moore Square would have an urban general frontage. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and the Planning Commission recommends approval. So here's an aerial view of the site, so you can see a little bit older photo. You can see Moore Square under construction, and you can see the two sites in question, both largely used for parking at this time and owned by the city. So there's site 1 on the south side of Moore Square and site 2 on the east side. And we're removing some zoning conditions from site 2, that property on the east side of Moore Square. Removing the limits that are there. And what happens here is the entitlement for housing increases significantly, right? So the increase in height means that we can build a lot, the potential for a lot more units to be built there. So this is consistent overall with a comprehensive plan, a number of consistent policies here, and RHDC and your Planning Commission both recommend approval. What questions could I answer for you before you open? I will say the intent here, as I understand it, is for the city to dispose of these sites to allow for to enter into agreements for development here with the expectation that the site to the east would include affordable housing units. What questions can I answer for you before you open the public hearing?
Do we have any questions? Okay, I am going to open the hearing. As I said, one person is signed up in opposition, Michael Haken.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, nice to see you again, Ms. Baldwin.
Thank you.
I expect you're hearing me then. That was my first question.
We are.
Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to comment on this proposal. I represent the interests of City Market, which is adjacent to Site 1. Site 2 is somehow involved here, although it's a very different configuration. I created some graphics showing the effect of the build out of the zoning that's proposed there. That large pink thing is the proposed building site. There's no setbacks, height limits, parking, nothing. And I would like to say it may be possible to reconsider the use of this site to make it more compatible with the low-rise historic City Market district. There's some additional images there if the There we go. There's City Market Shops there on Blake Street. The building is potentially going to very much loom over our historic district here. And this is just something that will not be able to be repaired once decided. It may be desirable under the pressures of the moment to maximize volume or square footage perhaps, but I ask the city council to perhaps take a moment to reconsider what this really means for the city market. It would put us really into a kind of a valley between the current Sky House, even taller, right across the street to the west, and this very large structure that would be, I think, incongruous kind of an arrangement there. That said, that's an aesthetic and planning decision that I think the city council is well equipped to make. I'm just trying to point out what this really means as an adjacency to the city market. Additionally, as the presenter there could possibly move through some of these slides, when my father and I acquired this from the city, it was quite a distressed situation. And there were promises made that ran with the sale of this property to our partnership, which we've spent the last almost 30 years doing our best to promote and upgrade the city market. And part of the promises that the city made at our city council meeting and an adopted resolution, such as you all have been adopting, was to retain the development was originally, a urban renewal development that was headed up by the city and managed by what was Nations Bank or became Bank of America, and I don't know who they are now. At any rate, that was managed by a local bank. And the parking lot area, the Person Street lot, was a part of the parcel. It was cleared and demolished under a kind of an urban renewal thing. There was structures on it, and the entire block was developed as one whole. But due to some funding strings that the federal government put on it, the titles were separated. Nonetheless, the city at that point, and now considered it of a piece, and the promise was made to do a number of things. There's the minutes of the city council from back then, in which you can see, I'll just read the pertinent point. This was a resolution that says the city will commit to retaining the parking lot adjacent to the city market on South Person Street. That's the lot we're talking about, rezoning and disposing of, and other items. And this was adopted a few pages later. So that's what the city promised. And we acquired and have been operating the property under that presumption that the city's promise was good. And we'd like to ask the city to perhaps reconsider or table this and have some discussion, because we're not trying to oppose to what the city generally wants to do for the development. More square area is desirable. And we're supporting so much of what the city's doing, and we want to compliment the council and the management and the staff on their diligent efforts that's brought the city so far. But at the same time, we have our concerns, and we represent the interests of the city market, which will be here ad infinitum, I expect, a long time into the future. And we'd like to see the city market in a position to grow and prosper to its greatest extent. And we'd like to see that the city keeps its promise. It's a resolution that was adopted that I believe is just as effective as any of the resolutions that you're adopting or deferring adoption on regarding these other land use issues. So again, we appreciate all the wonderful things that the city has done and the work in Moore Square and all the parcels it's assembled up Person Street, which could also be turned to the usage I'm told this is thought of having. So with that, I thank you, and my point is made. I hope that you will consider a deferral and reconsideration of this unconditional zoning to a 12-story, no setback height limit, and the sale without conditions. We believe that these conditions should be included on any sale and right up front, not later in the process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was, let's see. Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions of Mr. Haken? Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, Mr. Higgins. So just from my understanding, the issue you have is the loss of parking from the city for the businesses there. Is that my understanding?
That's the number. Yes, sir. That is the number one concern I have. I also am concerned about the height. You know, I expressed some other concerns, but number one is the promise of retained parking adjacent to City Market should be kept.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Do we have any questions of staff? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing. This is, as we said, a city-initiated rezoning for 2 parcels of land. Staff will be preparing an RFQ or letter of interest to send out to members of the development community at the appropriate time. I think Bynum mentioned that one of the parcels will be asked to include some form of affordable housing. I think what we had suggested to staff is that they come back and with something that goes out to the development community, and we ask for big ideas. So that will be a next step in this. In the meantime, is somebody ready to make a motion? Councilmember Branch?
Yes, Madam Mayor. With this being in my district, and this is a conversation we've had about these lots probably ever since I've been on council in 2015. Of how we can use them to benefit the community. And I think from looking at our housing needs and challenges, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated February 1st, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda items under recommended action.
Do we have a second? Mayor Pro Tem Stewart has seconded that. All in favor, please raise your hands. Opposed? Clerk, Councilmember Cox is in opposition, the rest in support. Yes, Councilmember Melton. You are muted again.
Now, is it working now? Yes.
Yes.
I just want to acknowledge that was the first I had seen of, I guess, that resolution, the promise from 1995. That's more than 25 years ago, and certainly the needs of the city have adjusted and changed. I also think that infrastructure has changed a bit. You know, one thing that I noticed with City Market, which I frequent often, is that there are 2 public parking decks easily accessible to City Market. One is right across the street and one is right across from Moore Square. And I hope that folks will use some other methods of transportation and alternative transportation to get to City Market. But there is a lot of public parking that has been constructed in that area. I think the needs of our city are great, and the needs for housing are great. And using the surface lots and underdeveloped property that the city owns is really important for us to lead by example and to move that into production to house more people. And so I am certainly sensitive to the comments, but I think there's plenty of public parking nearby, and hopefully some more folks living near City Market will be some more foot traffic for the restaurants and the stores as well. So I just wanted to say that.
That's what we would hope. And there'll probably be additional public parking potentially at one of these locations. So, okay. The next item is TC 15-21 towing yards. No one has signed up in opposition. Could we get a report from staff?
Yes, good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. Justin Remetta from Planning and Development. This is TC 1521 towing yards. Just a brief overview. This is a externally requested text change. It would modify allowances and requirements for the principal use of towing yards. I do believe the applicant has signed up and should be available.
Excuse me, Councilmember Buffkin.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt. I'm having a hard time hearing Mr. Remetta.
Okay, I'll try and speak more directly into the microphone.
That's
I hope y'all can hear me.
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, great. So just to restart, this is an externally requested text change. It would modify allowances for the principal use of towing yards. I believe the applicant has signed up to speak and should be available to answer any questions you might have of him. Brief history recap. This was referred from council to the Transportation and Transit Committee back in May of this year. Ultimately recommended, the committee ultimately recommended authorization and subsequently the council in September. The Planning Commission heard the case at their November 23rd meeting of 2021 and voted 6-4 for approval. Just some brief description of the current rules. So towing yards do require a special use permit from the Board of Adjustment. So there is a evidentiary quasi-judicial hearing. They are permitted only in the IH or heavy industrial zoning district today. There is a 1 mile spacing requirement from other tow yards, and then there are landscaping, street, and transitional protective yards along property lines and road rights of way. There's also a provision that the site can be used only for vehicle storage and not for sale of parts. And what the applicant is proposing here is to expand the districts where it would be allowed into the IX district. It would still require a special use permit. The applicant's also proposing the removal of the 1 mile spacing requirement. Through the staff discussions and committee deliberations, provisions were added that would prohibit the use within 100 feet of a major street and within 150 feet of a residential district or residential use. Got just a few maps to hopefully put some of this in context for you. This first one here is simply the heavy industrial zoning throughout the city. So heavy industrial zoning district is one of the least prevalent zoning districts in terms of land area throughout our jurisdiction. This map, which shows the existing tow yards that have been permitted previously. As you can see, there's about 11 of them, and the blue outline would denote the 1 mile buffer. Here you'll see in purple the IX zoning district. So in contrast to IH, IX is fairly prevalent, one of the most prevalent non-residential districts that we have throughout the city. And then finally, just the colored areas combined would be the IX and IH here. These would be the areas that, if council adopts the text change as written, where tow yards would be allowable uses. Finally, when council set the public hearing for this item, you requested some information related to availability of parcels and impacts to potential future S-line corridor. We did provide some backup and memo in your materials, but this slide kind of summarizes that. All in all, there's a little over 2,200 parcels that would be available in the IX and IH district combined for towing yards. If you subtract out the requirement for 100-foot distance from major streets, and if you also applied that 100-foot distance to railroads, that would leave you with a little under 1,000 parcels. If you, going a little further, extended that railroad buffer out to 1/8 of a mile, would leave 861 parcels. Bumping further out into a 1/4 mile would result in 721 parcels that will be available for this use. believe that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions council might have.
Let's see, Councilmember Fort, then Branch.
Thank you for the presentation. I noted the planning commission vote was 6-4. Really couldn't tell what the 4 folks in opposition were opposing. Could you expand on some of that?
Sure. I believe the dissenting planning commission members felt that a more appropriate path to getting a tow yard approved would be to rezone a parcel to IH to target specific parcels instead of a more global text change, which would apply citywide.
Thank you.
Councilmember Branch.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. In the presentation, you mentioned 721 parcels that would be available. That means they meet all the requirements under this change.
Well, no, sir. As written, the 721 parcels would be if the text change were adopted as written and you included a 1/4 mile prohibition or separation requirement from railroads as well. So as written, the text change contains no separation or distance requirement from any railroads, only from major streets and residential uses and districts.
Okay. Councilmember Cox.
It's pretty clear from the maps that the impacts are really concentrated in northeast and southeast Raleigh. And so these impacts are really affecting largely Black and brown communities. And so I find it extremely inequitable. I do like the comments from the Planning Commission, from those in opposition, that these expansions of towing yards should be taken on a case-by-case basis through the rezoning process. Clearly, if someone wants to have a towing yard, they could rezone a property to IX, to heavy industrial, in order to get that use. And so I will be voting against this text change.
Okay, any other questions of staff? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. We have one person signed up in support, Tom Johnson. Is he on the line? Beth.
I am on the line, and thank you very much, Mayor and members of council. I appreciate your time tonight on this, and we've been working on this for a long time. I was the one who proposed this on behalf of my client, Raleigh Towing, and this is primarily motivated by the contract with the Raleigh Police Department with respect to towing services. In other words, my client contracts with the city to provide those services when there is an accident or when vehicles need to be towed for public safety reasons, that type of situation. And in that contract with the city of Raleigh, it has some standards. A lot of them are inspection standards that the towing companies have to subject themselves to if they're going to be part of this contract. But the main standards that really concern this amendment to the ordinance is that, number one, the location has to be within the city limits of Raleigh. Number two, there has to be at least 20,000 square feet of vehicle storage space. That doesn't include the building or any other structures that are related to the facility. And that's what leads to the issue that we're faced with. There's not very much heavy industrial available in the city. The only alternative district that is available that's an industrial district other than heavy industrial is IX. And you can't, it would be very difficult to legally rezone properties to heavy industrial if they're in other parts of the city not near heavy industrial, because you would result in potentially a spot zoning issue that legally would prohibit that. So the rezoning option is not really an option for that reason. So really IX is the only available alternative. And the memo that was presented and the number of parcels that were available that was presented that I know Councilmember Branch asked about, that was prepared on the assumption that a site for a tow yard is only 4/10 of an acre on average. But with the city's Raleigh Police Department standard of 20,000 square feet, and then you have a building, and then you have buffers, and then you have possibly stormwater controls, you're looking at a site that approaches an acre in size, not 4/10 of an acre. So that further limits the number of parcels available. And the biggest reason that motivated this is that very issue. My client for approximately 5 years has been looking for a site, has been looking to lease a site, looking to buy a site in the heavy industrial area, and simply has been unable to find it. It even becomes difficult even with IX because, with this pending, he was looking around and finding locations in IX. We were comfortable with limiting it to with 100 feet of major roads, but when you start then including railroads in it, you start eliminating appropriate sites for this type of use, including in small industrial parks that may back up to a railroad. And there are a lot of those in the city and a lot of the opportunity. And I understand the concerns about the S line, and I appreciate that. But you also have to keep in mind that in the IX district, it already allows as permitted use, vehicle repair major and vehicle repair commercial. Very similar type uses to tow yards that are already permitted in IX. So that's our concern, is how do you provide service to the Raleigh Police Department in a growing city and comply with those regulations and find a site within the city limits of Raleigh that you can provide that service. And literally my client is, stuck in that. And he just recently re-upped with the city and just re-signed a contract and went through the inspection process. But with his lease expiring this year, he has to find a way to find a location that meets the standards that Raleigh Police Department has asked for. So that's why this is, where we are with the process. And I'm happy to answer any questions. We're really trying hard to come up with a solution, but giving the zoning districts that are available, it goes either IH or you go into the IX district for this type of use. And thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions at all any council member may have.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Councilmember Cox.
If there's an issue with the police department about the towing of vehicles, then we really need to have a conversation with the police department. And I think we haven't had that conversation. And so I, move ahead and do this massive change throughout the city, I think is unwarranted, and certainly not until we've had that conversation with the police department and look at alternative solutions to meeting their needs.
And Councilmember Cox, I do want to mention that we have requested from the beginning that the police department be involved in the discussions because of the rules. Now, I don't know, and staff would have to comment on it to what degree the police department was, but we knew they needed to be involved because of the police department rules actually creating the issue and creating the difficulty in finding a location.
Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council, I think this request has brought an important problem to us. And it's something of collision of priorities. I do not think that we should jeopardize the future of our commuter rail with the potential that tow yards would be located where our future stations and the districts that we will need around those stations in the future. And we looked at, for example, a city like Charlotte, and around their light rail stations has cropped up a dense urban development, and that is very important to the success of their light rail. And I think that will be the experience here. I too am looking for a solution, and I have had a number of conversations with Mr. Johnson, and I will, and in the end, I think there is a better solution than adopting this policy, and it is to change RPD's towing contract. I've learned quite a bit about towing in the last few months. Didn't know there was so much to learn about towing. But there are different kinds of tow yards, and we dealt with one this afternoon. And with the change we approved this afternoon for private towers, those being the people that patrol private lots and tow parks that are tow cars that are parked unauthorized or illegally, whatnot. This is a different kind of towing. This is motorist assistance, wrecks, abandoned vehicles. And I think that the nature of the towing that we're talking about here right now is very different than the private lot towing in this way. If you're at a friend's house and you park in a spot you're not supposed to, or a friend's apartment, let's say, and you get towed, you can't go very far. You can't go anywhere without your car. But in this context, the one we're talking about here, wrecked, abandoned, stranded motorists, typically the owner of the car is going to go somewhere else. The car is disabled. That's why it needs to be towed. So the motorist is already in a different location, and there's less of a public interest element in having the tow yard located close to the place where the car was towed from. So I think the better solution, the more targeted solution, is to change RPD's contract, and I'd like to instruct the staff to undertake a review of the potential for that. And with the changes we've made to private towing this afternoon, the changes to RPD's contract could mirror the changes that we made, which would allow tow yards to locate outside of the city. And that would eliminate all of the risk I see related to commuter rail. So I'd like to hear from the staff about that. And I'd like to set this off for a month to allow for time for that discussion and see if we can't fix this in a more targeted surgical way rather than a wholesale change to this zoning district. And again, I say I'm really trying to solve this problem, but I cannot prioritize the need for tow yards over the success of our commuter rail. So I'm happy to have more discussion, but that would be my proposal and my motion at the appropriate time.
I'd like to ask the city manager, is 30 days sufficient time to look at this issue this seems a little more complex than what we originally may have thought. Is 30 days enough time for a review and to come up with solutions and recommendations?
I would say probably if you were to give us 45 days, that would give us a little bit more time to facilitate some conversations and get the right people at the table so that we can bring back a report that adequately addresses and reviews the current policy in its current state and what changes need to be made so that we can be productive moving forward.
Okay, then what I would recommend is we do give the 45 days. Councilmember Buffkin, what was your recommendation related to this particular issue? Is it to keep it at the table and hold it? Is it, what are you thinking?
I would suggest holding the hearing open and continuing the hearing until March 15th.
Okay, that is the 45 days.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. One of the things that I want to look at too as this text change is the lot size requirements. I think we can put requirements in on lot sizes and things of that nature. So that can be considered. And there's always the option if needed. Transit and transportation is always ready and willing to deal with tow yards as we dealt with the last one.
Well,
If I say just a moment, my only concern is my client's got a lease that's coming up in the fall. So, I mean, we need to get to a solution to give my client time to be able to find another location. I mean, you're going to, unfortunately, unless there's some solution, end up putting a towing company that's been here a long time and served the city well out of business.
Councilmember Buffkin.
I would warn the council to be very cautious when we're changing citywide policy for one person. Again, I say this is a legitimate problem. There's a solution out there. I don't think this is the best one.
And we're willing to talk. It's just, I don't want to, I just don't want it to stretch out too long, too much longer and it's not just for one. I mean, it's any number of tow yards that may need to relocate for whatever reason. So we need to find a way, a mutually satisfactory way that we can go forward on this. So that we can allow these companies to exist and to support the police department.
Madam Mayor,
Councilmember Branch.
if I may, we have, whenever we've had issues with contracts and needing extensions, in order to make changes or resolve an issue, I think our staff has had the ability to work through those and do extensions as needed. I mean, we're doing it currently for our Go Raleigh transit system. So I think if we just give the city manager staff the authority to work with that contract piece of this that the applicant is having issues with, while we work on this policy separately, I think that would be a good approach.
Well, I think the issue is the lease that they currently have for the tow yard, that expires at the end of this year. So
is the lease with the city of Raleigh?
The lease is with the property owner. In other words, the site is in the city. It meets the heavy industrial requirement. But going forward, my client's been searching for 5 years to find another location. That's the difficulty.
Gotcha.
The contracts with the city, with Raleigh Police Department to provide the service, and that contract has the standards in it. But my client just wants an opportunity to find a location that's reasonable. And this use isn't unlike others that are in the IX district, like major vehicle repair yards. So that's why we made the proposal. I understand Councilmember Buffkin's concern, and there's no desire to cause any difficulty with commuter rail whatsoever. It's just a desire to find a location where this valuable service to the city can be provided. I mean, that's the bottom line. So I would like to be involved in the discussions with the police department to come up with a mutually acceptable resolution of some sort. And it's unfortunate that the heavy industrial district is so limited in the city. It really is. And that tow yards have been put into that. I wish that were not the case. Maybe there was be an intermediate district, but there's really not. So that's unfortunate. And all of this has made it difficult in trying to work through this process.
Councilmember Melton.
I was just going to add, in an effort to move this along, because I think we're starting to circle. I would like to hold this because it doesn't sound like there's much appetite or support to move forward on it tonight. I don't think we should vote yet, because I will say that I know this has been a long process. We had this issue in Transportation and Transit Committee. Then it went to council. We authorized the text change. Then it went to staff. Then it went to Planning Commission. Now it's back to council. So I don't want to not acknowledge all of the work that's already been done, but also acknowledge that maybe, they say sometimes cases settle at the courthouse steps. Maybe this wasn't the right moment to try to figure out a compromise, better solution. And so if one can be found, I think it's worth holding it to find. We've heard from the applicant, if that's the word, that they've got sort of a timeline with the fall, their lease being up. I think so 45 days, with the understanding that folks who have participated in good faith in the process are waiting for a response. I think we need to be mindful of that, but I would be fine. 45 days. Let's make sure that everyone involved is at the table for the discussion on creative solutions and see where we can go from there. So I would be fine with that.
All right, so what we have here is moving this to holding this open, and then having staff work on potential solutions. They will report back to us in 45 days at the March 15th meeting. City Attorney, do we need a formal vote on that?
If you're just going to leave it open, I think you're fine. But you're moving it to you've stated the date, so yep, you're good.
Okay. All right. That was
Very much.
Thank you, Tom. That was our final case this evening. I want to thank everybody for your time tonight, and we will see each other next week at our work session. So thank you. Have a good night. Be safe.